welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with the Loyalist, Charles Coulombe.
Loyalist?
Yes. Aren't you?
Loyalist?
Yeah.
You mean an individual in our glorious revolution who remained loyal to the evil forces of the crown, bound to squeeze every last penny of the freedom-loving communists, colonists, I meant, slip, freedom-loving colonists out of them, right? That's what you're saying.
Yes.
An advocate of oppression.
Big time.
An attacker of all that's good and true and stuff.
And stuff, yes.
You mean to say Mel Gibson's main nemesis in The Patriot?
Ooh. Yeah, big time. He was a really good villain.
So that basically you're casting me as a villain in this movie.
I know. It's kind of unfair because you're quite clearly chaotic neutral, but
listen to you. Listen to you. As long as the rebels are winning, I'm a loyalist.
Wow.
As soon as it slips, I turn rebel. No, I joke. You are, of course, entirely correct. Where my sympathies lay, or would have lain had I been there, which I wasn't, despite the rumors you've heard about my age. But no, my sympathies would definitely have been with the crown. And that has a particular reason right now and today.
Okay.
Because, well, in real time, it is Saturday night, the 4th of June. And apart from being the feast day, apart from being the Vigil of Pentecost, which in the pre-54 is a real big deal. It's sort of like it's like a somewhat shortened version of the Holy Saturday rites, with prophecies and blessing of the font and all kinds of good stuff. Apart from that, and being the feast day of St. Francis Caracciolo and a whole bunch of other interesting people, it is the birthday of King George III.
Ooh.
In the American colonies, the birthday of King George III was celebrated until the unpleasantness. It was celebrated with, what do you call it? It was celebrated with fireworks, parades, speeches, banquets, barbecues.
4th of July?
Everything we do for the 4th of July was originally done for the King's birthday. They just shifted it a month later after 1776. Well, after 1783 anyway. But yeah, that was how the King's birthday was celebrated. And interestingly enough, this year, his birthday, he was the first king to have a real jubilee. And this year, we find ourselves in the unprecedented Platinum Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II, which is not, however, being celebrated on the anniversary of her accession in 1952, which was, I think, in February, but rather on the anniversary of her coronation in 1953. So we're basically commemorating not just 70 years of the Queen, but 69 years since the coronation. So whatever you think of the Queen and the British / Canadian / Australian / New Zealand / Jamaican monarchy, she is the only world leader still around who was around when I was born. And of course, she's the only queen I've ever known, the only British sovereign I've ever known. Everybody else has come and gone, popes and presidents, bishops and prelates. She's just been there year after year after year. And she's still here today. Her first prime minister was Winston Churchill.
Wow.
And she had such interesting men serve under her as ministers of various of her governments, as Menzies in Australia, Diefenbaker in Canada, the great Maurice Duplessis in Quebec, Unfortunately, all of her South African prime ministers were Republican. She came to the throne too late for Jan Smuts. But in New Zealand, she had Muldoon and a bunch of other really, really good people. Um, so yeah, she's had some good prime ministers around the Commonwealth. Most of them have been filth, but some of them have been really decent. But good or bad, she's been stuck with them as the so-called voice of the people. Because, of course, the great drawback of the British system is that the Queen must accept whatever bill Parliament passes, no matter how odious it might be to her personally. And that's a point of the system that I personally don't care for, and that most Americans don't really understand. Time and again, they'll say, "Well, how can the Queen sit still for that?" Well, the way your presidents have sat still for your Supreme Court's abortions. Even though the difference being that your president could put through an executive override if it wanted to, the way Bush did with Bush did with Guantanamo. But it's not important, so they don't do it. Infanticide is, after all, a sacred right for most Americans.
Yeah, that takes me back to some really good episodes when we were talking about this and the role of the Queen. And I think I asked you what would have happened if the Queen didn't sign something. And I think you responded, then there would be a republic.
In all likelihood, she'd be out of a job, and whatever benefits the monarchy brings, and it does bring some, they would be gone, poof, poof, and you would have a Republic of England with the scum that are now the political class, just totally, completely it. But that was not quite the case back in George III's day. And in fact, the success of our revolution is one of the things that put the British system where it is now. Not something to be proud of. I mean, we always think just about our independence. We don't realize the damage it did to the British system. But in any case, for the delectation of our studio audience, if that it be, there are a couple of quotes that I think I shall read. I shall read in the here and now.
Okay.
Let's see if I can find them. Let me see. Now, these are by three writers of our past who are not generally thought of in these ways: Nathaniel Hawthorne, Washington Irving, and Nathaniel Hawthorne, Washington Irving, and H.P. Lovecraft. So there you are. The first is Hawthorne, from a piece he wrote called "The Old Tory," in which he imagines himself an old Tory in Boston after the evacuation, and he's stayed behind, and he's a veteran of the French and Indian War. So this is Nathaniel Hawthorne now. Quote, "Well then, here we sit, an old gray, withered, sour-visaged, threadbare sort of gentleman, erect enough, here in our solitude, but marked out by a depressed and distrustful mien abroad, as one conscious of a stigma upon his forehead, though for no crime. We were already in the decline of life when the first tremors of the earthquake that has convulsed the continent were felt. Our mind had grown too rigid to change any of its opinions when the voice of the people demanded that all should be changed. We are an Episcopalian and sat under the high church doctrines of Dr. Kaner. He was the rector of King's Chapel in Boston. We have been a captain of the provincial forces and love our king the better for the blood that we shed in his cause on the plains of Abraham. Among all the refugees, there is not one more loyal to the backbone than we. Still, we lingered behind when the British Army evacuated Boston, sweeping in its train most of those with whom we held communion. The old loyal gentlemen, the aristocracy of the colonies, the hereditary Englishmen, imbued with more than native zeal and admiration for the glorious island and its monarch, because the far intervening ocean threw a dim reverence around them. When our brethren departed, we could not tear our aged roots out of the soil. We have remained, therefore, enduring to be outwardly a freeman, but idolizing King George in secrecy and silence, one true old heart amongst a host of enemies. We watch with weary hope for the moment when all this turmoil shall subside, and the impious novelty that has distracted our latter years like a wild dream give place to the blessed quietude of royal sway, with the king's name in every ordinance, his prayer in the church, his health at the board, and his love in the people's heart. Meantime, our old age finds little honor. Hustled have we been till driven from town meetings. Dirty water has been cast upon our ruffles by a Whig chambermaid. John Hancock's coachman seizes every opportunity to bespatter us with mud. Daily are we hooted by the unbritched rebel brats, and narrowly once did our gray hairs escape the ignominy of tar and feathers. Alas, only that we cannot bear to die till the next royal governor comes over. We would fain be in our quiet grave. Well, that's something, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And the funny thing is that the last part kind of reminds me of today. You know, the days before the rainbow flag. You know, our new flag of freedom. What? What?
Okay, well, why don't you wave your flag of freedom then, Phil?
I don't have one. Now then, much shorter, we have poor old Rip Van Winkle, who woke up after 20 years' sleep, and he was asked who he was, and he said, I am a poor, quiet man, a native of the place, and a loyal subject of the king, God bless him. And immediately he gets mobbed as a Tory. Uh, Poor old Rip Van Winkle. But lastly, my last bit of loyalist sentiment comes from, of all people, H.P. Lovecraft. You wouldn't think of H.P. Lovecraft in this sense, would you?
No, I
Or would you?
wouldn't. What loyalist sentiments has he expressed? Something about
Oh,
leeches and spells and non-Euclidean instruments in
no, oddly enough. Oddly enough, no. He also, in addition to all that stuff, he wrote a very good guidebook to Quebec, which is still so good, despite the many years ago that he wrote it, because he used to hate the French Canadians because they were like foreigners polluting beautiful Yankee Rhode Island. But then he went to Quebec, and he realized how in those days we had maintained our traditions so completely, and he utterly fell in love. It totally changed his views on the French Canadian. And so he wrote a guidebook to Quebec, which was so good that it was translated into French and is still used today. You can still buy it there as a guidebook. It's so well done. But he has this comment about the revolution when he's speaking about the division, shall we say. Quote, this is him now, not me. It was then that in 1775 broke out the unfortunate conflict which opposed 13 colonies of His Majesty to the home government, which led to the separation of these colonies from the empire, and which could well in the times to come have as an ultimate consequence the end of civilization and the return to a new barbarism of hybrid and foreign origin, characterized by a blind cult of grandeur, speed, wealth, and luxury. Sad story to relate.
Wait, what would create that?
The revolution, the separation of these colonies from the empire.
By the way, how could they still sell his guidebook? Wouldn't it be slightly dated?
Not in a place that doesn't change that much.
I mean, truly, like, how could it not change it? When did he die?
1937. or 36.
It's like
And he wrote it in the 20s,
okay,
almost 100
so
years ago.
exactly. So Quebec hasn't changed in 100 years.
It's changed, but all the biggest things are still very much the same. The buildings and so on. And, well, I mean, it's like the 1938 WPA guides. A lot of those are still in print because all these years after 1938, it's still recognizable.
Hmm.
Although there are some things that are different. The Pony Express Museum in Arcadia, California, is gone.
Yeah.
There was one in 1938. I know because I read it in the WPA guide to LA.
Is that like the one by the is that by the Arboretum or something? Where was that?
No, it was actually not. It was in that weird sort of island that's now occupied by the city hall.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. The round building.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's the city hall. There is a museum now, but it's not that museum. It's a new one, the Gelb,
Yeah.
which is a good museum if you've ever gotten the
I went
chance.
there. Yeah, I called it the Glib Museum accidentally, and you jumped on me for
And with good reason.
it. Yeah, no, it's
Arcadia
good.
demands respect.
All right. All right. No memes today, so we can jump right into the state of the week.
Hysteria?
Oh no, not hysteria. So this week, Charles, can you take us home to West Virginia?
It's almost heaven, but not quite. Well, I have to admit, West Virginia is not a state I've had a lot to deal with. In fact, well, first you've got to understand a few things about West Virginia. The reason why it has that funny shape is that it was originally part of Virginia. And what happened was that in 1861, when Virginia seceded, just as in other parts of the South, there were areas, especially the mountainous areas, but not just, of various states, that were not keen on seceding. And these often had been heavily loyalist during the Revolution. Just as in the North, heavily loyalist areas were often Copperhead during the Second Civil War. In the South, they would tend to be Unionists. And there's a reason for that. In both cases, the dominant sorts, or I should say in all three cases, the dominant sorts said to the backwoods and the swamps and the pine woods and various other out of the way neglected places, we have a glorious crusade for you to shed your lives on. We who have pulled the taxes out of you all this time, we now want you to fight and die for glory. I don't think I want to do that, and I don't like you very much. So that bred in the during the American Revolution, it bred loyalism. In the North, during the Second Civil War, it bred Copperheads, and in the South, it bred Unionists. So in Virginia, the area that's now West Virginia, most of it, mountainous area, few or no slaves, and they had no interest in leaving the Union. So they declared themselves to be the government of Free Virginia, to which for a short time was added those counties that were conquered by the federal troops immediately around Washington, Fairfax County and places like that. To them, the boundary was basically decided by the federal government while Virginia was at war. And to them were added the easternmost portion of the state, which actually was slaveholding and was not really keen on leaving Virginia. It includes the famous town of Harper's Ferry, where
Rebellion, right?
John Brown had his rebellion.
Yeah.
So very ironically, that became part of West Virginia when the boundary was drawn, and West Virginia was recognized as a state by Congress in 1863. Initially, its capital was at Wheeling, which you see is way, way up in the north, and that was to keep it safe from this still ongoing fighting in the area. After the war, they moved down to the more centrally located Charleston, West Virginia. All right, so that's its odd history. Now, as to what I know about the place, I know Harper's Ferry. Near Harper's Ferry is Martinsburg and a place called, and we've discussed this before, the Wizard's Clip at Priest Field.
Oh, right.
That's in that part of
Oh.
the state. Um, the northern area of the state um, is the Panhandle, as it's called, where Wheeling is. Wheeling is still the biggest city, but for years and years and years, people driving from Ohio to Pennsylvania or the other way the state of West Virginia made a ton of money by having uh, lower speed rates there. So you're barreling from Ohio to Pennsylvania. You don't realize you're suddenly in West Virginia until the county mounties or the state troopers pull you over.
I've never really looked at the map of West Virginia, and it's probably the most fascinating. It's got the most fascinating boundaries. Like
Oh yeah,
it goes up right between Steubenville, Ohio, and Pittsburgh in this little tiny uh, appendage, if you will.
yeah, and that appendage is the Panhandle.
And then it's practically in D.C. It goes up to Martinsburg, and it's practically in Washington. Because
It's very close. Yeah,
the boundaries are so weird, especially on this eastern side, how they did it.
but if you notice, if you imagine that as part of Virginia, it fits.
Interesting. Okay. Well, its border with Pennsylvania is just two lines. That's very simple.
Yeah, and that line between Maryland and Pennsylvania that goes into West Virginia.
Yeah.
That's the Mason-Dixon line.
Ah, I see. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay, so
but
any so West Virginia is highly loyalist, and you've not
well,
really.
it was loyalist during the Revolution. There were a lot of loyalists there.
But I mean, there's no remnants.
Not really.
Hmm.
Uh, but as I say, the remnant is it's being antipathetic to whomever's in charge. Now, the being very mountainous, there were a lot of mountain people, very isolated Scots-Irish folk, who were great for feuds. And they were the most famous, of course, being the Hatfields and the McCoys. And that particular feud got its start in the Civil War because one of the families was Confederate and the other was Union. And that ideological problem became personal and continued for many years. And so the Hatfields and the McCoys became a byword for family strife like the Montagues and Capulets.
What city were they in, or what area?
I don't remember, frankly,
Huh.
uh, but they're out in the sticks somewhere. And there's a lot of mining in West Virginia, as there is throughout the Appalachians, coal and other things. And as a result, there are towns that have a lot of Italian and Slavic settlers who were brought in after the Civil War. And they're really the backbone of the church in West Virginia.
Sounds like my kind of place, to be honest.
Maybe. Uh, Wheeling, as I say, is the biggest city, and that's also, I think, the site of the diocese. I could be wrong, but I think that it's the Bishop of Wheeling. Um, Let me see, what else can I tell you? John Denver made it very famous, of course,
Of course.
because he thought it was almost heaven.
I, I
All his
really.
memories gathered round her.
Well, that's good.
He heard her calling in the early morning.
um,
He knew he should have been home yesterday. Yesterday.
Yeah, it
Life
looks
is old there, older than the mountains, younger than the trees.
older than the mountains, younger than the trees.
Yeah,
Wow, that's deep.
isn't it?
All right.
As I say, I really haven't. I've seen Martinsburg. I've seen Harper's Ferry. I've been to Wheeling. I've driven through it. But I'd be lying if I said I had spent a great deal of time in the interior of West Virginia, except Charleston Airport.
Okay. I feel almost satisfied a little bit. We got a little gotcha here. Like maybe it's a state you haven't really explored so much. I feel like we were pleasantly surprised with every other state, but this one,
Well, no, I mean there are other states I don't know that well, but West Virginia, unless you've got a real reason to go there, and there are reasons to go there. I mean, it's a beautiful state. What I've seen driving through it. Um, and a couple of times I've driven. Actually, now that I'm thinking of it, I have driven through Charleston, but I was on my way to Kentucky,
mm,
and I just didn't spend any time. Of course, it's also the site of the Mothman prophecies. Can't leave that out.
that's a good one. I've seen that one. That's really a scary one, psychological.
It is, and the funny thing about it, apropos of nothing in particular, I had always disliked Richard Gere, who for me was kind of a slimy guy like Colin Farrell.
Yeah.
But Axel and Christian, one night, they forced me into an impromptu Richard Gere marathon. We saw
What?
two Richard Gere films. It's true. We saw Chicago and we saw the Mothman prophecies. And I came away no longer loathing Richard Gere.
Oh, okay. Nice, I guess.
I don't know. They just had their 25th wedding anniversary. I can't put their success up to watching Richard Gere movies, but impromptu movie marathons with your wife may not be a bad thing.
Well, I guess it depends on the movies, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
I wouldn't
I
have.
don't want to be doing like a Whoopi Goldberg marathon or something like that, right? Like let's get someone decent, shall we?
Well, I don't know. I liked Whoopi Goldberg in one film.
Ghost?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. She was
Yeah.
great in Ghost. I mean, she was just
That was
totally.
that made her, to be honest.
Well, it
And
did. And
she
if she'd
sucked in
retired
Star
after
Trek.
that, it would have been great. She was very upset with the with Archbishop Corleone excommunicating Nancy Pelosi.
Well, who cares? That's church business. I know separation between church and state, right? But can the
No,
church
no,
do
no. Yeah,
anything
but
within the church?
not between mouth and state.
Oh, not between mouth and separation between mouth and state.
No, there is none. Not if it's the mouth of a celebrity. I mean, it's like Jimmy Carter attacking the church for not ordaining women. Where does he get off? That would be like my attacking the Baptists for not being under the Pope. Shut up. Would you, or for not doing infant baptism? Maybe that's why you're in favor of abortion, because you won't baptize infants, moron.
Well, maybe. I
So
mean,
there's no separation of mouth and state. Any celebrity can yap about Catholicism to his heart's content, no matter how stupid he is and how ignorant of it he is.
I think Hunter S. Thompson said it best. In democracy, you got to be a player. We're not a bunch of used car salesmen from California.
You really think that?
He really
I
said
think
that.
they
He really
are.
said. You can look
No,
that
I'm
up.
sure he said that.
You can
I'm
look
sure he
that.
said that. But I think they are a bunch of used car salesmen from California. Who's he trying to kid? I mean, put these guys in loud plaid suits. Hey, come on down. V8 engine, ladies and gentlemen. This car was only driven by a little old lady on her way to church every Sunday. Of course, he's had the odometer set back several times. The thing's obviously about to fall apart. Oh no, it's a classic. It's a classic. It's not a wreck. It's a classic. Poor Hunter, he missed out on seeing his worst nightmares come true.
He was a weird one because he doesn't fit the mold, right? Because He's super liberal, but he's also a gun nut. So that's like that makes all the liberals' heads explode.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
which would have made him happy. I mean, he was sort of a personal terrorist. You know,
What
you
does that
accuse
mean?
it means he had no interest except causing trouble. I mean, you accuse me of being chaotic neutral. I think Hunter S. Thompson, if that's true, then he was really he was about as chaotic neutral as they come. You
I guess
know,
that's true.
the trickster, the the other trickster. You know, the guy who's with you until you're winning. Then he'll switch sides.
Wow.
Keep that pot boiling. Keep stirring the pot. Let's see what we got here on the bottom of it. Ooh, that's gross. Let's make sure it floats on the top.
All right.
But I'll always be indebted to him, though, for the phrase, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. That epitomizes my career.
Yes. All right. Let's get to the questions.
All right.
Let's start off the show strong. We're going to start off with a question from Vendée Radio.
Oh, always strong. What do we got, Monday?
It says, please, could you comment on that fascinating warrior, man of letters, and Renaissance man, Ernst Jünger? I am given to understand he converted to the true faith and received the sacraments a year before his death at the age of 102.
All true. All true. Ernst Jünger was a fascinating, fascinating character. Um, he was part, when he was a young man after World War One, he was a World War One vet. Um, and after World War One in Germany and elsewhere in Central Europe, but Germany in particular, you had a lot of people who were not happy with having lost the war and not happy with what replaced the old regime, and really not happy with the old regime either. And these people were kind of lumped together as what was called the Conservative Revolution. And they were looking for a new Germany that would be, well, as one fellow said about Britain, a country for heroes to live in. As Merler Vandenbroek said, was one of them. The Germans ceased to have kings when they ceased to be a kingly people. And people of this sort, they were interesting because they wanted to unite the old Germanic virtues with the new scientific world in which they found themselves. Now, they were very diverse beyond that. Some of them were very devout Catholics or Protestants. Some of them were atheists. Some of them were pagans. They also shared, however, a great belief in action over mere abstract thought. Um, and so this for a lot of them came out of World War One. Now, in the immediate aftermath of World War One, there was a lot of unrest in Germany, a lot of uprisings and various problems of different kinds, and the army was limited to 100,000 by the Treaty of Versailles. So you had these paramilitary groups called the Freikorps arise, and the Freikorps were led by a huge range of people. They were just every imaginable variety of non-communist you can put your finger on. You'd find some Freikorps unit was connected to them, but by and large, they were more or less allied with the Conservative Revolution, which itself, as I say, was just very mixed. So Ernst Jünger was very, very much at the forefront of all of this, and of course, the conservative revolutionaries, so-called, were very much against the political class, which they felt had sent them and their brethren to their deaths in the Great War. And now, the Great War being over, we're busy running the country into the ground and selling it out to various interests. So they weren't what you would call very happy with the status quo. Now, out of this ferment, arose, amongst other things, the Nazis. But what's interesting is not the relatively few members of the conservative revolution who joined the Nazis, like Ernst Jünger, who had his own interests. He was a rainbow flag flyer. But people like Commander Eckhart, who ran the biggest Freikorps, Jünger himself, Ernst von Salomon, who either quietly or publicly opposed the Nazis. And those who did so out of their own set of beliefs, because they saw the Nazis as brown-shirted Bolsheviks, which they were, as men of the left. Well, the Nazis, of course, could not tolerate any alternatives. So when they took power, it was well, I mean, a lot of conservative revolutionaries like Edgar in 1934. A lot of the others scattered out of the country.
What did
Jünger
you say?
stayed.
What names did you say?
Edgar Jung, not to be confused with Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist of the same period.
Okay.
And then the conservative revolutionaries sort of drifted in various ways. Some of them left the country, some stayed and kept quiet, some joined the resistance. Von Stauffenberg and his circle were very much part of the conservative revolution. Now, of course, because they opposed the political class, they also opposed its product, what we call democracy. And in the years after World War II, this has been very difficult for subsequent German regimes who are committed to democracy to, they want to somehow annex the heroism of the anti-Nazi resistance while avoiding its ideological content. Jünger underwent some sort of in a sense, a conversion. His son died on the Eastern Front, if I recall, and he became much more a man of peace in a lot of ways, but still very, very conservative, very anti-Nazi, very anti-communist, very anti-socialist, very anti-liberal. And he lived a very long time, writing and working almost until the end. And as Vendée Radio says, he found in Catholicism the summum of everything he was striving for. Personally, I feel that if it hadn't been for the disruption after Vatican II, he would have joined the church a lot sooner.
What time? When did he join?
In the late 80s, early 90s, a year before he died.
Wow. Okay. That makes sense then.
Yeah. Because he, by that time, the German bishops had betrayed Paul VI over Humanae Vitae. Well, I mean, they were the scumbags they are now for the most part. There are honorable exceptions. But for the most part, they were the kind of morons that run the Church of Germany into the ground now. And for some reason, Jünger was kind of contemptuous of them. And it took a long time for him to separate the church from the scumbags who were running it into the ground. But he did in the end.
Okay.
It's an important distinction to make in any period, even if you didn't belong to the conservative revolution in Germany between the wars. As some people haven't.
Yeah.
Your brother didn't.
Wait, what? My brother didn't what?
He was not a member of the German conservative revolution between the wars. He's an example.
Yeah, of not being a member.
Yeah. But there are a lot of others. Bill Biersack. No. You remember that old guy your dad used to raise pigeons with?
Yeah, Mr. Ensberger.
He wasn't one. That's the one. He wasn't one of them either.
Okay. All right.
I,
So
I, I could tell you about some more who weren't. Bill Feeney, he wasn't one. There were a lot of people who were not members of the German Conservative Revolution between the wars. A lot of them.
I guess there's a lot of similarities with these people because they are all people who don't identify as being from Berkeley. Did you know that? I bet you didn't even know that.
I
See,
bet I didn't even
I'm
think about
connecting.
it.
I'm connecting the dots here, Charles.
All right, well, wait a minute. What if being from Berkeley, being part of the Conservative Revolution, and joining the Garden Clubs of America are too random to really connect unless you're a conspiracy theorist of the most invidious kind.
I feel like that's a very weak ad hominem argument. You're just gonna
Oh, you
slap
think so?
labels on people?
Garden Clubs of America?
What about Garden Clubs of America?
I'm glad you asked that question. Do you realize you could join? There's a local affiliate in Arcadia. There's an Arcadia Garden Club, and you could join it if you wanted.
Why would I want to? What do they offer me?
Guidance in putting your garden together, the camaraderie of other devoted gardeners, people like you who find hours in the garden the most refreshing thing they can do.
Sounds wonderful.
I can introduce you if you want.
No, I'm fine, Charles. Thank you though.
All right. Don't blame me if you never joined the conservative revolution in Germany between the wars then. Or if you had never moved to Berkeley.
Well, what the conservative revolution in Germany. Um, what's that? Remember, I think I asked you off the show. If you could write any book you ever like that you could write, what book would it be on? And what did you
Oh,
tell me? It was
it'd be a,
the
it would be
anti-socialists, right?
yeah. Well, I would like to write a history of European and Latin American the European and Latin American right from say 1815 to 1965. That would be wonderful. But
I see. The right. Okay, that's a little broader than you had previously told me.
you
I'm
know, I mean, conservatives, the Catholic parties, you name it. There are all sorts of names to these people. The anti-socialists.
okay. Okay, because I thought it was going to be like about that fight in Eastern Europe between those
Well,
factions.
yeah. Well, that would be a big part of it,
Oh,
and
okay.
also what happened not just to them but to similar groups throughout Europe uh, as a result of the Nazis and the great dilemma to collaborate or to resist. And those who collaborated obviously were destroyed with the Nazis. Those who resisted were reduced to utter irrelevance by the 60s.
Hmm.
And now their memories are continually insulted by the academic slash governmental slash media industry.
Honestly, whose isn't?
Well, that's true. And it's
Like,
interesting when you consider that the most dominant forces in our society, and by that I don't just mean in the United States, but in Western society, are dominated by such utter worthless filth, who push utter worthless filth.
I mean,
It's
it's
amazing.
honestly kind of boring. Yeah, I know. Everything before 1960s was absolute trash and garbage, and now we live in a utopia. Great. Okay, or not
You live
utopia according to them, but
a big steaming heap of utopia excreted from the bowels of the universe.
that's just such an extreme level of hubris. It's just.
It's hubris and it's nasty, but at least the orange man's gone. Well, you
uh,
gotta give him a
you know,
bone to chew on.
I have to ask a question because I don't really watch TV or news or social media and so like do people ever start like that? Do they ever like do that Trump hate anymore? Where it's like, well, no, it's finally like not on talk shows or stupid Jimmy Kimmel or or whatever.
Every now and then someone will bring up Trump, but the problem is when his successor is kind of senile, you know, please, why don't you try to wake your president up and see if you can get him to remember what he had for breakfast?
Okay.
I know it's tough, but you know, hey Whoopi, why don't you go talk to Biden? I wonder if he'd remember Whoopi's name.
It's such a weird um, dilemma we're in, where the other side honestly has more energy that it their candidate is not the other guy. Like you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it's never been so much about voting for a candidate as in voting against a candidate, which is
that's
sad,
true.
you know?
Well, I mean, you know, look, when you're on a certain path, it has to play itself out, unless for some reason it changes. Now, one of the things about our sort of government as it's evolved is that it makes both the rulers and the ruled very short-sighted. The ruled think no further ahead than the next election or the next press conference. Those are the rulers. And the ruled, well, they'll just go along with whatever keeps them fed. Uh, and they both get stupider and stupider. The problem is that in with and under all that, there are real problems that printing up more money or slogans won't really fix. And when enough of those things come to a head, then our society will buckle. And what will emerge out of that, I do not know.
Okay, I'm gonna hit you with a haymaker question right now. Are you ready?
All right?
In 2017, you had previously stated
I'm keeping my left
that
hook up.
if Donald Trump had put in Supreme Court justices who eventually uh, take down Roe v. Or overturn Roe v. Wade, that you would vote for Trump.
I did.
So if Trump runs again, would you vote for him?
I would.
And
Bet he won't run again.
publicly, like not what you did like last election, where it's like, oh, did I vote for him?
Who knows?
Did I vote for him?
Did I vote?
Did you? That's so ridiculous.
No, I'll make good on my promise if the Trumpster runs a third time. But I don't think he will. And if he does, I don't think he'll get the nomination. Because, you know, the snafu he pulled with Washington on January 6th, and I'm not talking about, oh, isn't it terrible? The Republic was shuddering on its foundations. That's crap. You know, and 107 people who went into the Capitol in that mostly peaceful demonstration, to coin a phrase, if they'd have been like the mostly peaceful demonstrators of the preceding summer, the Capitol would be a smoking ruin right now. So it's not that. But when he called all those people to Washington with no plan, I mean, what was he thinking of? What was it he wanted to accomplish with that? I don't know. It certainly didn't help. The one thing I did like out of the whole catastrophe was the QAnon shaman with the buffalo hat, which personally, I mean, that guy, I understand, is still in solitary confinement. So it shows you the regime, you know, Sig Bloody Heil, baby. But I would love to see his hat made obligatory headwear for the Speaker of the House. You know, I mean, that or a fool's cap, you know, with the bells, or a dunce cap. I believe that power should be rewarded by being made to look ridiculous.
Wow. Um,
Wouldn't
I
it be great? Would it be great if the president had to wear a bodysuit when giving the State of the Union?
I personally, my biggest like kind of like half joking idea that I'm really in favor of is I forgot which California statesman was in favor of it, but he wanted all politicians to be like NASCAR drivers, where it's like, okay, you're sponsored, you're bought and owned, just put it all on your outfit, put all the sides. It's like, okay, yeah, these guys are my sponsors.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. They're lobbyists. That would be perfect. I'd be in favor of that. And I wrote a short story some years ago about a future British prime minister getting ready for an annual ceremony. And he's putting on his morning coat and his decorations and all this. And he's at 10 Downing Street, and he's really not happy. And he's going about these ridiculous rituals he has to go through as the price of power and so on and so forth. What it ends up being is that in front of the king and the royal family and television cameras, he and the entire cabinet get publicly spanked. It's an annual thing. And at the end, as he comes out of 10 Downing Street and he looks at the king and the royal family, barely able to contain themselves with laughter, holding their jaws set so they won't giggle, and the Lord High Punisher with a paddle in his hand. And the only consolation he has is that, one, his colleagues all over the Commonwealth are going through the same thing inside of their governors general. And two, after all, it is a small price to pay. Utter humiliation is a small price to pay for complete power.
There honestly should be some mandatory mortification or something. Like if you really like, you're there to serve, so there should be some sort of obligatory sacrifice,
Yeah.
that you have to make to prove that you're willing to serve.
Well, a slightly more serious idea I came up with years ago was the idea of an activity tax on legislative and executive figures.
I like that one.
Did I ever tell you this?
Yeah, like for every bill you vote for, it costs you
It
money.
costs you.
So, but I
Yeah.
feel like that's a good counter to, because in our system, it's a huge penalty professionally to say no to anybody.
Yeah.
You
Whereas this way, if you vote in my system, if you voted for anything, and this would be true of Congress, the state legislatures, county commissioners, or boards of chosen freeholders, if you're in Jersey, or city councils, you'd have to pay a lot for introducing a bill. You'd pay for voting in favor of it, and it'd be free if you voted against it. And then, similarly, if you were the executive figure, you would have to pay for signing a bill. You'd pay nothing for vetoing. And of course, any executive order that you put out, you'd really pay a lot.
I mean, would that go too far though? I mean, would that stop everything?
No, I don't. I think it would not stop whatever they thought was really important.
Yeah,
Probably because somebody off stage was paying them, enough to make up the difference.
A lot more.
Yeah.
They kick up the price.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I could vote for that. I got to pay 10 grand if I vote for it. Here's 20. Well, all right. You got yourself a deal.
Oh man.
Believe me, the political mind always finds a way around problems.
Okay, in that sense, then, wouldn't they just up the prices for the lobbyists? So it's like, okay, it costs a little bit more. Okay, well.
Yeah, so only the really rich lobbyists could afford to get anything done.
Is that good or bad?
I think it's good. The richer ones tend to be brighter.
Wow. Okay. All right, sounds good, Charles.
I don't want to give the impression, though, and I think someone might get the false impression of what I've said, that I think that the political class are inherently a band of scumbags and worthless dogs. Not true. There are exceptions.
What are the exceptions?
Backbenchers, people who really aren't in power, people who have a particular constituency.
All right, obligatory question. What do you think of Elon Musk?
I don't know enough about him to give you a real answer.
I'll tell you one thing you would like about him. He's really getting hot on this issue that, in just terms of recognizing that we're not breeding anymore. You know.
Well,
Um,
that's good. I mean, I didn't know that. This is what I mean by saying I can't express an opinion about it because I don't know. But if that's a hobby horse he's getting on, then I'm all for it.
he bought Twitter.
That could be bad or good, but if I mean, I don't know. But if we'll see how Twitter goes. If Twitter, say, in a country that's constantly yapping about freedom of speech, Twitter and Facebook and all of their fact finders and fact checkers and all that, it just please give me a break.
Hmm.
And if you're throwing someone off because they're hateful, you better be even-handed about it. I mean, uh, I can see that you'd throw an advocate of white supremacy off Facebook or Twitter, but would you throw someone who's constantly talking about white privilege off?
No.
Well, then you're a racist yourself, and you deserve to be shut down.
No, you're just not in favor of diversity or tolerance.
No, you're a racist. You need to be shut down. The late lamented Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In had a feature called "The Resident of the United States." They would play "Hail to the Chief," they'd say, "Ladies and gentlemen, the resident of the United States." Da, 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 da. And he was, I forget whether, I mean, I can see his face, but I don't remember if it was Rowan or Martin. It was one of the two. And he would say something like, my favorite, "I believe that anyone who's an extremist should be taken out and shot." He'd always deliver some helpful and inspiring message like that.
Gosh.
And then would cut away. The resident of the United States.
That's good. All right, we spent a lot of time on this miscellaneous politics, so let's move along.
All right. Move along, prairie moon, move along while I croon. All right.
All right. Question from Ross, who says, "Dear Vincent and Charles, I attended the AGM of an order I belonged to last weekend in Cambridgeshire. Their services are very high church. And over the last several years, I've been extremely taken and positively impacted by the Grand Prior who led the services. I haven't quite figured out what it is about his services in particular. However, they have been deeply emotive experiences, the like I have only ever experienced a few times previously. I decided to look into him a bit more following this recent event and found that of his many roles and positions, he is also associated with the Old Catholic Church, which appears to have declared independence from something called the Union of Utrecht in 1910. Charles often references the patriarchs of the West and East. However, I wondered if Charles has any knowledge of the Old Catholic Church, and if the subject of West and East continues to develop, or has it been so long that things will be as they are until, well, a miracle happens?"
Well, yes. Let me deal with the. Let me deal with the first, and that is the question of the old Catholics and who they are, which I think, you know, is a good thing to come up with. Basically, you remember the Jansenists?
Yeah.
All right. Well, the church in Holland had a lot of them, and a chunk of it was excommunicated back in the early 1700s, the so-called Little Church of Utrecht. And they continued to have the apostolic succession. Well, then in 1870, you had Vatican I. And as a result of the definition of infallibility, you had small groups break off from the church in Germany, Austria-Hungary, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. And these gathered together under the Little Church of Utrecht, who gave them all apostolic succession, consecrated bishops. Then, in the 1890s, thanks to Archbishop Ireland, you had the Polish National Catholic Church schism, and the Polish National Catholic Church in America turned to the old Catholics in the Netherlands for orders and got them. And the result was that all of these different groups united under what was called the Union of Utrecht. Now, initially, their big thing was to resist, they called themselves Old Catholic because they were resisting the innovations of the Catholic Church, like papal infallibility. But then they started getting rid of other stuff. So they got rid of the Council of Trent, and they got rid of the Filioque, and they got rid of the Latin Mass, and they got rid of clerical celibacy. So, I mean, they started out supposedly, quote unquote, conservative and traditional, and they ended up pretty wild. Well, then the life went on, and the Union of Utrecht. Well, one thing I should also mention before I forget is that the only old Catholics per se that really could be called that officially were members of that union, and they were only in those countries I mentioned. But before World War I, a man named Arnold Harris Matthew was consecrated bishop for the Old Catholic Mission in England, of which there wasn't much. He got into a catfight because he had allowed a number of members of the Theosophical Society to join his church. And he finally decided that Theosophy was not compatible with Christianity. So he told his clergy that they had to choose between him and the Theosophical Society. So most of them chose the Theosophical Society. And those bishops and priests formed what is called the Liberal Catholic Church. He, in turn, Arnold Harris Matthew, after that, he consecrated some other people as bishops. And that line of succession came to the United States and splintered. And there are tons of groups in America that call themselves Old Catholic. But except for Arnold Matthew having gotten orders from the Archbishop of Utrecht, they were not connected with either the continental Old Catholics or with the Polish Nationals in America. Okay. Now, I don't know for sure, but my suspicion, from what Ross has said, my suspicion is that the bishop he met is part of the Nordic Catholic Church, which consists of people that, when the Union of Utrecht began consecrating women, they separated from them. Or it could be somebody else entirely. I don't know. Because there are a lot of these different groups that call themselves Old Catholic in England and America. So I'm not quite sure who his friend is, but that's how the Old Catholics came about. Could there be a way for the churches to reunite? Well, let's put it this way: in the West, we're seeing a sort of implosion, in a way, of the most extreme view of papal power, as though it's being taken to its absurd conclusion. In the East, we see their kind of ecclesiology shattering completely, with Moscow and Constantinople excommunicating each other. And now, just to make it even more fun, Ukraine, which is why they excommunicated each other. The Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine has cut itself off from Moscow in protest over the war. So maybe this will
what does
bring
that mean?
about.
Cut itself out. What does that mean?
Well, all right. Basically, in 1948, when they'd already done this in the rest of Ukraine, but when Western Ukraine was definitively annexed into Russia, the Soviet government forced the Ukrainian Orthodox, Ukrainian Catholics, and everybody else to join the Russian Orthodox Church under Moscow. All right, 1990 or 1989, Ukraine becomes independent, and the Ukrainian Catholic Church immediately reemerged. But the Ukrainian Orthodox were faced with a dilemma. Do we form an independent church? And if so, who are we under, Constantinople or Moscow? Well, Orthodox in Ukraine ended up splitting in three between a fellow who was considered himself the patriarch of an independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine, and a sort of autonomous church of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church under the Patriarch of Constantinople. And it was the support of that group that led the Patriarch of Moscow to excommunicate the Patriarch of Constantinople and vice versa. Well, the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine has now separated from Moscow in protest over the invasion. So what this is going to do to the whole schism between Moscow and Constantinople, I have no idea. And whether or not this is going to bring a rapprochement between Ukraine and between the entire Ukrainian Orthodox groups, a reunion of them and a rapprochement with Constantinople, I don't know. And I don't know what it means for Ukrainian Catholics, for that matter.
Man, that's rough over there. You know, schism is kind of my emotional reaction to hearing about all this schism. I feel like it's so much easier to deal with heresy, at least for myself, than schism, because it's like, with heresy, it's like, okay, this is why this is heresy, because this and this and this and this. But then, like, schism is not like that at all.
No.
It's weird.
So, well, schism is usually about grabbing for power or control on one side or the other or both.
Yeah.
And I mention all this because I can foresee a future wherein all of us having been thrown down to the bottom, reuniting may be part of picking ourselves up again.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say. The evil and pride that we human beings treasure up so often spoils anything decent we could do.
Yep. This is why we can't have nice things.
Says the great cosmic great aunt over the world. She looks at us and she says, "This." She looks at Ukraine right now. She says, "This is why we can't have nice things." You children, I just don't know what to say. You know, cosmic great aunt, I don't know where you fit in either theology or philosophy. That is an impertinent question, and a good child would never have asked it of his cosmic great aunt. Yeah, but I really don't see any room for you in any belief structure I've ever heard of. Well, that's not for you to decide, is it, little one? Any more out of you, and you're going to bed without your supper. Oh, cosmic great aunt, do I have to? You heard me, young man. Now march right in there and turn on your television. Okay. Beware of the cosmic great aunt. She's very censorious these days, but you notice everyone ignores her.
I know.
They keep doing what they're doing, and she waves her finger. You'll be sorry for that, little ones.
All right. A question from James, who says, Charles, you've spoken before about how the Great Schism of 1054 saw the loss of the healthy counterbalancing that the Eastern and Western churches had against each other's weaknesses, to the long term and ongoing detriment to both. But did something similar happen with the Protestant Rebellion? The loss of unity with Rome caused untold and all too apparent evils from the northern churches. But did the Catholic Church lose a healthy influence from the northern churches that has caused the Catholic Church long term detriment? If so, what is it? Or is it more of a case that the northern churches had influenced the Catholic Church with ideas antithetical to the faith that has contributed to the detriment of the Catholic Church?
Well, I would say that certainly in those countries where the Reformation triumphed, the Catholics who were left, being reduced to just struggling for survival, uh, lost an enormous amount in terms of liturgy and intellectual life and so on. The church always loses something when she loses a child,
Mm,
even if it's only one person. Another bad thing that happened is that a number of the Catholic monarchs, seeing their Protestant brethren turning the various local state churches into totally obedient appendages, tried more or less to do the same with the Catholic Church in their given realms, which was not a good thing. And out of that came the enlightened despots and people like Joseph II and so on. And of course, especially the history of overseas settlement, uh, the fact that there was not one Christian body uh, really retarded missionary progress in places like China and India and so on. We had all the contending churches and religions that all claiming to be Christian. So that retarded evangelization a lot.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Was the Protestant Rebellion a prerequisite to the liberal democracies we currently live in that
Yes.
it sort of abolished the hierarchies and
Yeah. Definitely. I
authority?
mean, it began the collapse. You see, because if the authority of the church is no longer sacred, initially it drops one to the crown.
Mm,
But why is the crown sacred if the church isn't? So it drops again to the family, to the ordinary appurtenances of society. But why are they sacred? And it drops again to
yeah.
the individual. And now in our day, I mean, having revolted against altar and throne and family, we're now, and really ultimately the individual, now revolting against reality itself.
Hmm. Um, what about any anti-clerical considerations? Uh,
Well, I mean, certainly the state churches of Northern Europe uh, generated a lot of anti-clericalism because, to a greater or less degree, the the clergy was seen as agents of the government by a lot of people, and so that in turn sparked two different things: atheism
hmm.
and odd sects, odd religions, strange religious movements, because people were not getting what they needed spiritually out of the state church. That was where Methodism came from, to point out a least obnoxious example of this. But before the Methodists, during the English Civil War, you had all kinds of weird sects emerge out of Anglicanism, the Ranters and the Quakers and the Puritans and so on and so on.
All right. I don't want to skip over a aspect of James's question, so I'll repeat it. Did the Catholic Church lose a healthy influence from the northern churches?
Quite possibly. Quite possibly. I mean, we certainly see. Don't forget, those northern churches were the most recently evangelized, and the countries of Northern Europe, had been the most recently evangelized, uh, and as a result, still had a great deal of evangelical fervor themselves until it was sliced at the Reformation. And they all had particular spiritualities and their own saints and so forth, their own Marian shrines, their own miraculous images, their own everything that were lost to the church as a whole when the Reformation engulfed them.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that was a tremendous loss. They tended to be, they tended beforehand to be much more adventurous in some ways, and that we definitely lost.
Hmm. All right, a question from Mason, who says, on the subject of nuclear war, it is my personal belief that adding more countries to NATO, such as Finland or Sweden, drastically increases the chances of nuclear war. Yet no important politician, save for Rand Paul, seems to be pushing back against adding new countries. What is a compelling argument that we can use to persuade others that adding new countries to NATO might not be a great idea and will only provoke Russia?
Uh, well, I don't think it is. I don't think it's a great idea, and I think it will provoke Russia. Um, I mean, I feel about NATO as I have since the Soviet Union fell, that we either should have gotten out of it and left it as the European Self-Defense Pact or something, or if we stayed in, to invite Russia and the other Central European countries into it. What we did was the worst of both worlds. I don't think bringing in Finland and Sweden is a good idea because it's once again pushing another stick at the bear. Uh, but as far as nuclear war goes, I grew up under it, under the threat of nuclear war, and it didn't happen. And it didn't happen for a lot of reasons, but most of them being that both sides were quite aware of what it entailed. Now, it may be that either or both of our rulerships are too stupid to catch on. But if that should be the case, so be it.
You mentioned poking the bear, referring to the bear as Russia. Um,
No,
don't you think Russia looks weak in this war? I mean, I'm surprised they still haven't. I'm surprised they just didn't take over Ukraine. It's still going on. Don't you
it's
think
still
that makes
going
it look
on.
weak though? Like if that's just Ukraine.
No, I'm sure it isn't. And I'm sure, I mean, the Soviet army
Wait, the Soviet
had
army?
problem.
Oh,
The
never mind.
Soviet army had problems 30 years ago. And obviously, they haven't really been addressed in those 3 decades. Now that it's the Russian army, uh, Russia, not since Afghanistan, had the once Soviet, now Russian army, had to really dig in and fight like this. But that's a separate issue from nuclear war. You don't need a very well trained or successful conventional military force to launch ICBMs.
Hmm, I see.
And so the fear in a lot of quarters is that if the Russian rulership gets too desperate they'll do a nuclear war just for the hell of it. We're going down. Everybody can come down with us.
Well, NATO doesn't. I mean, does NATO have aggressive plans that threaten the state of Russia?
If they think so, if Finland came in
I mean,
to NATO and Sweden,
okay.
it would basically turn the Baltic Sea into a complete NATO lake.
Okay.
Mind you, I don't think the Russians are necessarily reasonable about this, but they are in a position that we've put them into. We, by we, I mean the Americans. And of course, it's the Ukrainians who are paying the price of all this rot. Although the Russians are paying it too. It's a horrible mess.
All right. Kind of have a comment that is turned into an amusing question from Janae, and she says it's a she, right? Janae.
Janae, I don't know.
Oh, okay. The blandness of British food is something of a misconception. Our food is full of spices, and it has been since the medieval period, at least for those who could afford it. Unfortunately, the time at which most Americans began to sample our fare was after World War II.
Oh.
And given that we were subject to food rationing until 1954, this was a particularly bleak, stodgy period for British cuisine. More unfortunately still, it shaped the tastes of a generation, and it's taken a while to disentangle ourselves once again. If you have any tips for persuading my mother-in-law that broccoli really doesn't require boiling for 45 minutes, I would be most grateful. That's a fantastic comment there. I mean, I never thought of that at all.
No, I did. I mean, see, I knew Englishmen who'd lived through the war, and they all liked weak tea. And the reason why they liked weak tea was because they got used to it during the war, and they never went back to strong tea. I mean, I like my tea with milk, all right, but I like it strong black tea. But most of the English folk I knew who would serve me tea served it kind of weak.
So I've been doing a lot of black tea. I got a brand that seems decidedly British called Twinings.
Twinings, yeah.
Twinings. Is that strong or is that weak?
Well, it depends on how long you leave it in to seep.
Oh, okay.
And don't forget, these people didn't use bags. But if you use a bag, you're on wartime rationing. You might use it 3 or 4 times.
Oh.
Guess what that means?
Weak tea, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, they had a great taste for Spam, which I could never really wrap my head around.
So, I mean, this is kind of the $1,000,000 question that's really interesting is does British food get a bad rap, and British people once upon a time like really have great cuisine?
Well, yeah, I mean, they've always had a tendency to overboil, frankly. That's kind of there. But I mean, there are some things they do very, very, very well.
Huh.
They do game very well. The full English breakfast, or full Scottish, or full Irish, is just great. I mean, lean bacon, white sausage, blood sausage, potatoes, mushrooms, egg. It's wonderful. Tea, afternoon tea that people make fun of, actually can be very, very good. I mean, and not just with scones and clotted cream either. Depending if it's a good heavy tea, there'll be lots of wonderful little sandwiches and so on.
Do you put milk in your tea?
I do.
Did you always do that?
I did. Yeah.
I haven't really done that yet. It
Well,
looks weird.
Let me explain.
I'm not averse to it. I might one day try it, but yeah.
Well, let me explain. Milk is one of the many gifts that the French Canadians gave the British Empire.
Oh, so that's why you do it. Okay.
Well, yeah, because my dad did it. But uh, what's important to understand, though, is that when the British first drank tea, they didn't put milk in it. They put in lemon, they put in all sorts of weird spices, cinnamon, and they do strange things with it. Meanwhile, in the enchanted land of Quebec, we were drinking coffee that was bought in Senegal when we were under the French, and we put milk in it, café au lait and that kind of thing, and it was quite good. But then came the conquest of the plains of Abraham, where the old Tory was wounded, and we passed under the British Crown. Well, no more coffee from Senegal. We got tea from India, but we kept putting milk in it. Well, the occupying British, they caught wind of this, and compared to whatever garbage they've been putting in the tea before, this is incredible. And they brought it back to England, and from England it spread all over the British Empire and into New England, in fact.
That is quite a tale. That's really good.
Yeah, it's one of our few real contributions to world civilization, and one that we get no credit for.
I like these cross pollination stories. The coffee and croissant, and the.
Yeah, but they're only possible through the evils of colonialism. Remember that if we were living in
Oh.
the idyllic non-colonial world that our academics, government, and media people want us to live in, we'd all be sitting in the mud speaking languages totally incomprehensible to anyone who lived more than 4 miles away. Wouldn't that be fun?
I don't know. I'm so confused because the church is so anti-science. Why weren't we just playing in
Why
the
weren't we
mud?
all starving and dying?
Yeah.
Well,
Why?
because they were liars and hypocrites.
Oh.
And all the while they were condemning science, they were encouraging it.
Oh. This is confusing. We need to get our lives in order, shall we?
No, we don't. We need to make them even worse. All the more confusing. No, I mean they want it both ways.
Yeah.
The church is evil because it encourages people to be virgins and to breed like bunnies.
Oh, that's another good one. I never thought. Whoa.
The church is evil because it encourages people to party like there's no tomorrow and to do these terrible penances.
Wow. All right, final question for this episode. It's a very special question. It is perhaps like the only non-patron question I've been able to ask in months, I guess. But it's because it's a very special question from a gentleman named Mickey, who says, "Greetings. I have a wedding this coming September 10th, 3 days after."
Congratulations.
Yeah, 3 days after my birthday on the 7th, and am submitting my question now so that I might have a birthday and wedding gift of hearing from the eminent Charles Coulombe. If not,
Happy birthday.
yes, a little early, but there it is. Um, if not, being a poor peon incapable of joining the patron elite, I understand. All that being said, no, that's okay, Mickey. All that being said, it has been a while since I have heard Charles elucidate upon the weird. My question is this: Charles, will you again tell us strange things? If so, please do. Charles, will you?
Strange things. Bizarre, peculiar things. They do say, sir, that the lady in white walks through the blue room every midnight on the third Thursday of the month. That was the very place and time that Lady Elizabeth died. But that's not a real story. I'm just on free flow. Well, let me see. Let me see a weird tale from beyond. A bit of folklore, perhaps. Well, yes. Yes. I'll tell you a story about the loup-garou, a werewolf, as we call him in Quebec. Well, it so happened that there was a village in the far north of Quebec, Ungava, very, very small village, colonized in the late 19th century, where it was almost part of the year, it was almost night continually. Well, they had a problem. It was a very, very small village. They didn't even have a resident constable. So they had to hire a night watchman. But the old night watchman had retired and they were without one. And wouldn't you know it, just then, sheep began getting killed, their throats ripped out by some horrendous animal. And then the village drunk was killed in the same way. So people started hiding in their houses at night, locking everything up, fearful of going out. Finally, they had sent all the major papers in the province. They had sent ads asking for a new night watchman, and they finally got one. He came up, and it was the darkest time of the year when it's barely ever daylight. And he said, you know, is there a problem? Now, is there anything I should be aware of? And they looked at him, they looked at each other, the village fathers, and said, well, are you superstitious? And he said, of course not. I've been to the United States. I'm not superstitious. Why? Well, we're afraid that we have a loup-garou. And after he stopped laughing, he said, really? Should I have silver bullets to go hunt the thing? Well, you do what you like. Well, he says, I've got a shotgun, and if any big wolf comes after me, I'll take care of it. Well, all right. And a funny thing happened. The night watchman would make his rounds to the village streets, and then out around the outlying farms, and the killing stopped, which was good news and bad, because as anyone who knows the loup-garou can tell you, if the loup-garou doesn't eat, the loup-garou gets hungrier, and eventually loses its fear of being seen by many people at once. So hungry can it become. Well, it was New Year's Eve, and they were having a big, 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 big party in the parish hall. There was one young girl, Lilette, who was tired and wanted to go home. And everyone said, "Oh no, wait with us until later, and we'll all go out together." And she said, "Oh, I live very close; it won't be a problem." But the night watchman who was there said, "Nonsense, Lilette. Give me 20 minutes and I'll walk you home." So she said, "All right." When he finished looking around and making sure everything was all right with the party, he led her through the streets. Then, over the snowdrifts, came a bounding wolf with wide, flaming eyes, the eyes of a man. And the wolf, 6 feet tall at the shoulder. So he reared up, and the night watchman said to him, "Stay away from her, wolf thing. The girl is mine." And with that, he flung himself on the loup-garou, bit his neck, and killed him. Lisette, poor Lisette, she died of in a few weeks of anemia. The body that was found was not, it was some drifter, they didn't know. That was obviously the loup-garou. The night watchman continued his walks, but several other girls in the village caught anemia and died the way Lilette did. And then, of course, with the spring, the night vanished to almost nothing, and so did the night watchman. You see, vampires have no fear of the loup-garou.
Wow.
Weird enough for you?
That was a good one, Charles.
Was it strange?
So Lugaru is not a werewolf. It's just a really
Yeah,
big wolf.
it's a werewolf. That's why he has the eyes of a man.
Okay.
And that's why the body was some drifter.
Was it standing up on his hind legs? So.
Yeah,
Okay.
both.
Oh, okay.
They can stand up like a grizzly bear and they can run like a wolf.
Okay. Wow. All right.
They're not pleasant creatures. But we don't just have them in Quebec. Old France, Louisiana, Haiti, wherever French is spoken, they have folk tales of the loup-garou.
Nice. All
The
right.
island of Anticosti was famous for its loup-garou. And every year, they said in Bayogula, Louisiana, that all the loup-garou of the entire state would gather to have their annual festival.
Well, this reminds me that St. John's Eve is creeping
Fast
up.
approaching.
Yeah.
It sure is creeping up literally on pawing slowly toward you. But anyway, so that's my weird wedding present.
Weird wedding present, yes.
I think it's a very weird wedding present. I think that the cosmic great aunt of us all would agree.
Yes.
Why are you giving such a terrible thing to those poor children? Notice she comments, but nobody pays attention.
All right. Any final words, Charles?
Well, indeed. Today is, of course, June the 4th. Everyone will be receiving this on June the 6th, which is Monday. Friday coming is June the 10th. Now, why is that important? It's White Rose Day, the birthday of James the Third, son of James the Second, King of England, Scotland, and Ireland. And it was always the great Jacobite feast day, White Rose Day. In the traditional calendar, it's the feast of St. Margaret of Scotland, which was transferred to that day precisely because it was the birthday of James III by the Pope. So let your inner Jacobite out on Friday. Do it Scots, do it Irish, do it English, do it Welsh, do it Cornish, but let that inner Jacobite out.
All right. Sounds good, Charles. All right. That will do it for this episode. If you want your questions asked on the show, you can become a patron for as low as $5 a month. Get early access. Sometimes I release it on the pre-show and the full episode on Saturday and Sunday. And also get access to the pre-show. Usually it's around a half an hour, 40 minutes.
Oh, speaking of which, before I forget,
yeah.
I watched 2 films in this past week to try to rest my head from everything, both the forthcoming finals and the annoyances in church and state. They're both from 1967, both comedies. One with Dick Van Dyke called Fitzwilly, and the other with Ed McMurray called The Happiest Millionaire, which came from Disney and was actually the last live-action film Walt Disney produced.
You say Ed McMurray or Fred McMurray?
Sorry, Fred McMurray.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I merged Fred McMurray and Ed McMahon. They're now one person.
Yeah.
The two Irishmen. Who can tell the difference?
Okay. What was the Fred McMurray one?
It was called The Happiest Millionaire.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know he did comedies.
Oh yeah, he followed that one with another one about being a scoutmaster over 30 years, called Follow Me Boys. And what's funny about all 3 of these films is that I saw them in the theater.
The same day or what?
No.
Okay.
I saw the first 2 in 67 and the second in 68, I guess. Or the third in 68.
Are you ready for a completely random, well, not a random question at all, I guess, but just what you say begs the question. When was the last time you saw a movie in the theater? And what was it?
That's a very good question. I usually see them on planes now.
Yeah, I knew that. But like, I'm just trying to imagine something where, oh, you know what? I bet it probably was something for review. Like, remember when you reviewed Black Panther or something, or
Oh yeah, that's right.
right?
That's right. And that's probably, yeah, yeah, it would have been in 2018,
Okay.
in the spring of 2018, before I came here. And it would have been, it wasn't Black Panther because that was the first thing I reviewed.
Oh, okay.
So it was
Maybe
probably,
that Wrinkle in Time, or I don't know.
yeah, it was A Wrinkle in Time or the third Maze Runner.
Gosh, that would make me not want to go to the theater anymore. I'll tell you. I'll tell you that. Um,
Well, let's just say without popcorn, it would have been unbearable. But do you know I love popcorn with lots of butter?
Makes sense. It's good stuff.
I do. Lots of butter. I love popcorn.
Do Now here's a question: do you wash that down with something?
Uh-huh. I
Did
do.
But you don't do soda, or
Oh,
do
well,
you?
I I do in movie theaters because
Wow,
you can't get iced tea usually. If I can get unsweetened iced tea, I'll get it. But since I normally can't, I'll have Coke. Not
wow,
Diet Coke, not sugar-free, regular, normal Coca-Cola.
that's awesome. That's because that's what I do. And I didn't thought I didn't think you drank Coke at all. Actually,
I drink in movie theaters. I get a large Coke, and you know what that means.
yeah.
Large popcorn, about yay big, just gooey, oozing with nut oil substance, alleged butter. And then I will shovel that stuff in and wash it down and shovel and watch, and shovel and watch, and shovel and watch. I rarely get anything else. Maybe rarely a hot dog. Sometimes, rare occasions, nachos.
I love nachos and I love having nachos in the movie, but the big problem with nachos is you can't have them during the movie because
No.
you're crunching. You know, you're crunching so
Well,
loud. It's like
not only are you crunching, but the cheese will go all over you.
I guess that too. Yeah.
But but the one thing is when you're gonna get the butter infused popcorn, you need to pack a lot of napkins.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
So, but popcorn again is one of these uniquely American things. We have popcorn over here, don't get me wrong, but it started in the States and it's very American.
I like that. I never thought of that. You know, I like that we kind of unearthed that just now. That popcorn and soda in movies is an American thing.
It sure is.
Yeah.
It's just like pumpkin pie.
There you go. Okay, everyone, that'll do it. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. I felt like we covered a lot of really good topics. Kind of a serious day today, but learned a lot of interesting things. So,
Well, you know, there's a reason for that, don't you know? Poor Officer Clancy, he had a problem, you know. There was all this fuss over these red hot mamas, as you might say, and he wanted to disperse the rumors. You know,
yeah, the rumors with him and the Red Hot Mamas.
well, no, don't you see? He was providing security for a show. That's all it was. You
Yeah,
know, it was off duty, as it were.
what was the lady in question? Who was the lady?
Ladies, plural.
Oh,
Ladies, plural.
ladies. Excuse me.
They were red hot mamas. Spiritual daughters of Sophie Tucker. Well, I mean, look, they revived the aurochs. They revived the tarpad, both of which were extinct for centuries. Why is it so hard to think that they could similarly revive the red hot mama? Sophie Tucker was the last of them. But, you know, the last aurochs died in 1629, the last tarpad in 1827, and we have them running the European plains again. So why is it so hard to think that they could bring back the red hot mama?
I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know. There'll probably be a movie in a couple of years called The Red Hot Mamas about Sophie Tucker and her spiritual daughters. I don't know.
No doubt, no doubt. And Officer Clancy providing security and counsel. And he's assured me that the show that they do is entirely tasteful.
Good. That's important.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
He said artistic and tasteful. Then I said, artistic? How's it artistic? Well, you know, like all the Roman statues, the Greeks and all that. Very artistic, very tasteful.
Good. That sounds like him. Yeah.
And I said, well, wait a minute. These are Red Hot Mamas, so they're not stripping. Oh, it's not stripping. Who says anything about stripping? That's ridiculous. There's no stripping going on. I said, all right, well then, other sort of off-color jokes. No, I take my grandmother herself to the show, especially given the old lady's deaf. But no, it's not a problem really. It's all artistic, you know. That's what he said.
Okay, well, I'll let him be the judge of his own situation.
And he assured me that he assured me the contrary to the rumors, he's not getting a cut of the take.
Okay. I don't think Officer Clancy would appreciate. I mean, this is what you're doing right now. This is what you're doing. The hand puppet time.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about loose lips sink ships. Let's sew it up, shall we? Let's lock it up.
All right, fine. I'll just say that he assures me that he's providing his services absolutely free of charge, purely in order to encourage the growth of the arts, the fine arts in our hometown.
Awesome. I am such a big patron of the fine arts in our local area.
So see, there isn't a fine art I don't get a cut out of. I mean, wait a minute. What I meant was, why do you think it is the museums in our town don't have to worry about break-ins?
Ooh.
Exactly. Clancy's on the job.
There you go. All right. That'll do it for this episode, guys. Remember, if it's Monday,
it's off the menu.
But the soul you save,
well, you know, boy, it might just be your own.
All right. See you next time, guys.
God bless all. Ciao.